Michael Zahner was going to speak to us. Apparently, he's unable to be with us tonight. Hopefully, we'll have him come to the July 2nd council meeting so we can have that discussion that he's interested in us having. Next, we'll move on to our police chief, Chief Cole. Good evening, David.
Evening, Mayor, members of council. May 2024 monthly report. As you can see now. Thank you, Sheila. We had 1,229 calls for service for the month of May. 11 incidents, which were the crimes that were reported, for a result of 16 total criminal charges. Citations. Officers actually conducted 31 traffic stops, and they wrote 22 warning citations, and another 6 regular written citations. And our CRO, which is our community resource officer, is out making people happy. We had 23 ordinance charges. Most of those were failure to display, and 2 of those were in a no parking area. We had one reportable motor vehicle accident for the month of May. And you can see by the pie chart the breakdown of all the calls for service that we had. Just a couple of things. We went through a pretty vigorous interview process, and we had some very good candidates for sergeant's position, which is the position we've had open for quite a while. So we're now at full complement with all 3 of our supervisors. Chris Simpson was selected. He came to the top of the interviews, and it was tough, and it always is, especially in a small department, because you only have just so much room for growth. We hope after tonight's council meeting that we'll officially have him sworn in Monday, but we will definitely have him come in at possibly the July council meeting to introduce him. I'm hoping that we'll be able to introduce Tucker too, who passed the state exam. Everything is fine. Now we just hurry up and wait for the state to get all the paperwork back so that we can officially put them in a uniform. Hopefully the uniforms will be in, but probably not. Just like everything else, everything is backed up. But we're hoping to do that. We are also in the process of a background check on an officer who's accepted an offer from us. It's just pending our background investigation and some of the medical stuff. So we'll be excited to announce that a little bit more in depth when we can. We had conducted 2 interviews for possibly sending someone to the academy. We're going to continue to conduct more interviews, and we'll kind of see where it goes from there. Any questions before I hand out our annual report, which we finally have been able to put together? Yeah. All right. Give me a second. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Chief.
Just real quick, if you have any questions or if there's something that doesn't look right in there, let me know and I'll blame Jennifer for that. Just kidding. We work very tirelessly as I've reported in there. With this new system, all the departments are still struggling. Just some examples, trying to get the numbers When we switched over to their new system from their old system, we were fortunate. We didn't pay to have a data conversion like some of the departments did, and they lost a lot of data. But one of the problems is they had some of the data that they could retrieve. For example, for several of the months when they had gone from the new system, or from the old system to the new system, we got the numbers for the calls for service, but they couldn't tell us what they were. All they could do is give us a rough number. So this is the best we can do. But if you do have any questions or concerns, please let us know. This will be available online eventually, and you can pick up copies of it. Public can too, probably within the next couple of days.
I've got a question.
Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Just going back to the May report, there were 16 or 11 incidents in there and no arrest and no charges. I
Yes.
know there are reasons why this happens, but because there's a child abuse incident and a sex offense and a couple of drug things, just generally, why don't they?
Those, without getting into too specific, a
Right.
couple of those were unfounded.
Okay.
But we still have to carry them as a crime reported, and then we have to follow through with it in the investigations. And then if they're unfounded, that's
Okay.
pretty much why. And then some of those charges up there are still pending further investigation.
Okay.
Some of the drug-related ones, we always kind of try to make sure that we go for the bigger fish, so to speak, on some of those. So.
Gotcha. Okay.
But that's a good question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Chief, this is a little bit of a different subject, but the town of Nags Head had a program called Coffee with a Cop. And I was thinking, I don't know about the efficacy of it and whether it's worthwhile to do, but I thought it might be a win-win situation when the new coffee shop that is opening up, I think, during the summer, and Matt may know when it's actually going to open up. And having Coffee with a Cop maybe once a month, and you know, if you bring down the canine unit, I mean, everybody loves a dog, you know. I mean, so,
Right.
and also the new officers, it's a chance to possibly meet the community, find out what their concerns are, and to introduce themselves to the community. But this is, I mean, totally your call, so I don't
Sure.
know whether it's worthwhile or
Yeah,
what.
we can look into that. One thing I will tell you is from the 40 years of experience, I would have new officers there, but I'm going to be there or one of the sergeants, because if it becomes just a BI complaint, I don't want the new officers exposed to that, because that's not community policing. If you got a complaint, you either come to my boss or you come to me and we'll
Right.
deal with that. But as far as the community outreach part of it, yeah, I would look into that.
Right.
Yeah, not a problem.
Thank you.
Sure. Are you sure that's going to open? Because they've been working on it for like 200 years.
Is a coffee shop?
It's a contractor.
He says no.
Because we're also hoping, because the chiefs have they have a breakfast meeting about once a month. And we got nothing here. So it would be nice to have at least something where I can invite the chiefs to come. So we're looking forward to that opening too. So
Nice.
thank you.
You rang the doors on 10,000 businesses?
Yes. I didn't, but
I
they
know you
did.
I know you did. But
And that was when they were
to make sure
closed.
everything- I mean, that's a lot. when you
Yeah.
divide it By 365.
Well, we expect them to get out of the car and
Yeah, that's a ton.
do what they're supposed to be doing. So yes.
9,942 is a lot.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it gets pretty quiet in the off season, in the
Yeah.
winter and that. So there's no reason why they can't. So, yeah, back when I was trained, what you would do is you would drive through with the spotlight, and if you didn't see a reflection, then you had a problem because
They do that in
the
Kirkland
window was
County.
busted out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Next, we'll hear from our fire chief, Chief Ed Limbacher. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Not to steal some of the chief's thunder, but I will tell you, and I think I mentioned this before, that they are shaking those doors because at least on 2 occasions recently, they saved the market or the shopping center here from burning down. So just food for thought. Anyway, so the month of May for the fire department, 6 fire alarms, 2 incidents where there was nothing going on when we got there, 3 canceled en route, 4 public service, and 1 assisted police agency. I don't know why that's listed like that, Sheila. Is it not the pie chart on there either? Oh, there you go. Yeah, okay. 1 animal rescue, which wound up just being a cat entangled in some kitchen cabinetry. He lived, he's fine. 4 of our beach worship program, delivering 4 of those. 7 service calls. 1 explosive bomb or removal. That was just a test ordinance that we found someone called on. 1 arcing shorted wire. That was actually funny because it was a house that burnt to the ground last year, and they were very, very lucky this year. So I think I sent Cliff some pictures of it. Very, very lucky. So 1 hazardous condition, 2 elevator rescues, 1 motor vehicle accident with no injuries, 48 EMS calls, 1 brush fire for a total of, or I'm sorry, 1 structure fire also. And that was a total of 85 calls last month or for this month. And it was 52 last year. So we're 33 ahead of this year. So, which doesn't, in the big scheme of things, mean anything. They go up and down all the time, but we're definitely into the summertime swing of things. So any questions?
I was just going to ask, is the new building over on Highway 12 been handy to have your folks be able to be working?
Yeah,
out
they
of?
like it a lot better being over to Guada there because they're really not in the way trying to park over here. So it is nice that way. And it seems to be working out fine for us. So I have
Good.
no complaints about it.
It's getting ready to be the busier time of the year, so it's probably,
Yeah.
I'll probably ask that question again next month.
Yeah, there's not much to it on our side. You know, we got the rehab team running out there with the ice machines and things like that, but it's accommodating us very nicely. So,
Good. Great. Thank you, Chief.
all right.
Appreciate it.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Town Manager Cliff Ogburn. Good evening, Cliff.
Good evening, thanks. Just have 2 things to report. First, Councilwoman Sherlock and I have talked about the committee to work on the improvements to the cemetery. We've talked about kind of assembling a working group to kind of lay out what our options are and to try and come up with a path forward. We have a list of everyone that has ownership in the cemetery, so we can try and form a committee and then maybe eventually take a plan to a larger group before ultimately presenting it to the council for funding approval. So that's the first thing. Second, update on the file storage room expansion. We kind of expanded that from just the file storage room to some other upgrades and improvements in the facility. And so there's some budgeted funds left this year that have allowed me to be able to go ahead and engage Beacon Architecture to go ahead and start the project to remodel the existing town hall for Town of Southern Shores. The design will include new security doors, new conference, new reception room, new handicap ramp, renovated public toilet room, and enlarged file storage room. So hopefully we'll get this under contract here soon and get this work going and plan to have a project before you to hopefully bid soon. That's all I have.
That's great. Thanks. Any questions for Cliff? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Next, we'll hear from our town attorney, Philip. Good evening, sir.
Good evening to you guys. I've got one thing. As you guys, I'm sure by now have heard, the General Assembly passed State Bill 508 to repeal the Dare County Local Act and rescind funding that had been approved for the Dare County Affordable Housing Project. And Governor Cooper signed the bill on May 15th, giving the bill the effect of law. In light of this development, the lawsuit we filed in response to the earlier litigation is now, in our opinion, become moot. And we are recommending that each of the municipalities that joined in this effort authorize us to consent to dismiss the action. And no, it's not going to go there, but I mentioned this to you guys. Since it's become moot, if action had to be taken by someone else, if the defendants filed a motion to dismiss, there is some risk there might be fees awarded because we didn't dismiss the suit that we knew had become moot. So our recommendation is that you authorize me to advise the council that are handling the lawsuit to dismiss it.
Okay. Council, do you need some sort of a resolution, a motion? Do you need just by consensus, we can
Well,
tell you?
I need a resolution authorizing us to join in the dismissal,
Okay,
that the town joins in the dismissal.
okay. Be it resolved?
So if any other towns, any other municipalities decide not to dismiss, are we liable for anything, or is there?
I think my recollection from my partners that represent the other towns, everyone's considered.
Okay.
Right, and
It's
there's,
just a matter of getting to a meeting to get it resolved in open session.
so there are no issues left to be resolved.
No, ma'am. There's nothing left to be resolved.
Any other comments, questions? So motion to withdraw the lawsuit.
A motion to authorize me to consent to the dismissal.
Thank you. A motion to authorize our attorney to consent to the dismissal of the lawsuit. So moved.
Second.
And we set second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
sir. Appreciate it.
Mayor, that's all I have.
Okay. Very good. Thanks. Next, we have general public comment. Possibly some folks are here to comment, and that would be great. Len Schmitz, please come up and talk to us and tell us your name and your address.
Len Schmitz, 184 Wax Myrtle. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Just a couple of things. First of all, I want to commend the council for approval of the sidewalk between, can't see here, Dogwood and the cell phone tower. I've seen many people using the sidewalk and not walking on the streets, and I think that's a really great thing for the town and much safer. Second thing, as you've probably everybody has been to the beach lately, the beach nourishment, I think, project has been going really great. And we've planted grass from on almost all of the lots, all the way up to 13th Avenue. The second row of sand fence has been laid from the Pelican Watch up to the cell phone tower. And my reason here today is I'm requesting maybe put into the budget a second row of sand fence from where they left off up to at least Hickory, because there's many areas there that could use a second row of sand fence in that area. So, and so our plan, I haven't really talked to Cliff yet about planting more beach grass, but hopefully in November we'll be able to plant what the sand fence that they did put up between Pelican Watch and the cell phone tower. Will be able to, Civic Association and the Better Beaches will be able to plant grass in that area. And then if they put in a second row of sand fence from that area up to Hickory, maybe in 2026, we'll be able to plant that area. So maybe put into the budget the second row of sand fence between where they left off up to Hickory. Any questions?
Thanks, Len. No one else signed up, but if you've changed your mind, you'd like to speak to us now, let me know. No? Okay, moving on. We're going to discuss some old business, which is a presentation, and Cliff is going to introduce our speaker.
This is a continuation from the last month's meeting. We had discussion about MOU with the State of North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality Aquatic Weed Division for doing some milfoil treatment. We kind of hit the pause button and hit the brakes on that and decided we needed to come forward with a more comprehensive survey as well as some education about milfoil and 2,4-D and options for treating milfoil other than the use of 2,4-D. So I asked Dr. Robert Richardson, who's a professor of an extension specialist with the Crop and Soil Science Department at NC State, if he would be willing to educate us all. And Dr. Richardson, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
All right. Yes, sir. Very good. So I'll just turn it over to you. And you can share your screen whenever you're, there you go.
Yep. So is that showing up okay?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, Eurasian water milfoil is certainly not a new issue. If you can't hear me or anything as I go along, please feel free to interrupt me. There are quite a few milfoils worldwide. If you look at this bottom left image, that's a different milfoil species in an irrigation canal in southeastern Australia. So that's a very common problem for them. On the right over here, we have, of course, Eurasian water milfoil. So just a brief introduction on aquatic plants. We often will categorize them in the list that you see here because many of the control methods will be applicable on some of these, but not others. So we can have free-floating plants. Those would be plants that bob along at the top of the water surface. They may or may not have roots, but the roots would not be attached to anything. So that could be like a duckweed or a water hyacinth, something like that. Floating rooted plants would be like a water lily. You have a leaf at the surface and then either a stem or a petiole that goes down and attaches to roots in the sediment. Submersed plants are like Eurasian water milfoil, hydrilla. They start growing at the sediment layer and come up from there. They may or may not come up a little bit above the water column, but almost all their biomass is in the water column itself. Emergent plants would be like cattails that grow in shallow water and most of the biomass is above the water column. And then riparian plants would be things like trees that are maybe like wet soil, but they're not typically growing in the water itself. Now, there are benefits of aquatic plants. They do provide food, shelter, and breeding habitat for fish and wildlife. In general, the more natural the system and the bigger the system, the more important plants are for fish and wildlife. Plants can also offer protection from erosion, stabilize banks, reduce sedimentation. They can provide more clear water by filtering the water. Some submerged plants will oxygenate the water. So of course, when you have submerged plants like you see on the right, they're conducting photosynthesis. A byproduct of photosynthesis is oxygen, of course. But when you have a whole lot of aquatic plants growing up to the surface, like what you might see in the image behind me, it's the opposite effect because only the plants at the very upper surface can get sunlight. Anything down below that cannot get sunlight. So you actually have oxygen demand where the plants that are respiring are pulling oxygen out of the water, but you don't have enough sunlight getting in for photosynthesis down in the water column. So, some plants can oxygenate the water, but a whole lot of plants may do the opposite. And plants can have aesthetic values, though some are pretty and attractive and can be a nice focal point in a natural setting. Now, Eurasian water milfoil is a significant invasive plant in the U.S. Mainly, you find problems with Eurasian water milfoil across the northern tier states, but the eastern part of North Carolina is one example kind of outside of that range where Eurasian water milfoil grows very well and is problematic in a warmer region than where it is typically found. So it is fairly easy to identify. You're looking for leaves in whorls of 4. The leaves will be somewhat feather-like. They're typically a fairly bright green unless they're covered with epiphytes. The stems can be slightly reddish in color. It does have a flowering segment that comes up above the water column that you see in the upper right. So that's typically reddish, very small flowers. You have to be right on top of it to see it. But the leaves will always be in those whorls and very common. Now it does reproduce by several methods: fragmentation, seed, stolons, and the root crowns will typically overwinter and resprout the following year. So it is a weak perennial, herbaceous perennial, and does typically resprout. It can form really dense mats that you see there in the center, and of course native plants can't compete in that. And further up north, there are hybrids of Eurasian water milfoil and a native species, northern milfoil, and those hybrids can be more invasive than Eurasian water milfoil itself. I'm not aware of any of those hybrids in North Carolina or close to it, but those are out there, and just want to make you aware. There's also an avian disease link that's primarily with hydrilla and cyanobacteria, although it's also been found with that cyanobacteria and Eurasian water milfoil, but again, not as common with milfoil as with hydrilla, but that can or has resulted in deaths of waterfowl. Now, again, Eurasian water milfoil has been around in eastern North Carolina for a long time. In 1968, there were 8,000 acres reported in Currituck Sound. 2,4-D was used as a herbicide in 1968. There was a Sea Grant newsletter I found from 1976 that had some interesting quotes in there when local residents saying experts from Raleigh didn't know what they were talking about. One expert quoted as saying that the Eurasian water milfoil was going to collapse. So I guess just from a superficial overview, the local resident was more right than the expert. You all will have to let me know after this presentation if it's still true about experts from Raleigh. But pretty interesting history in there. And Cliff sent me the article on the right. Again, that's the 1974 article with some herbicide treatments. One name mentioned in there, Kurt Getzinger, has just recently retired officially from the Corps of Engineers. So he had a long, distinguished career in aquatic plant management and worked with Eurasian milfoil in the Sound back doing his graduate work a long time ago. But again, this isn't a new problem. It's been around a long time. I was involved with a student project in 2010, just doing some monitoring in Currituck Sound. And this isn't overly important, but just showing you the distribution that was found on the right, the darker green, the more dense milfoil in 2010. Now, we do have situations where plants are more invasive or characteristics of plants that make them more conducive to being invasive. Anywhere that you've got large areas of clear, shallow water, those are great areas for plants to come into. So where you have water that's especially 2 feet deep or less, 4 feet deep or less, also plants are going to come in and colonize those areas. We typically don't have limiting levels of nutrients in most of our water bodies in North Carolina. We have either moderate or high levels of nutrients, so that also helps fuel plant growth wherever plants can get sunlight. With introduced plants like Eurasian water milfoil, they typically don't have a lot of natural enemies. There are a few insects that were pests of some of our native milfoils that can be found on Eurasian, however. And then some of our invasive species just have characteristics which make them more competitive than native plants. Some may be able to conduct photosynthesis a little bit more efficiently than our native plants. Some are more shade tolerant, but they may have characteristics that just help drive their growth. So now moving into control, why do we want to manage these at times? You know, this is hydrilla in a lake in Florida. Obviously, you'd have a tough time using that lake for anything that you might want to typically do, whether it be recreation, fishing. You had an irrigation intake out there. As soon as you turn the pump on, it's going to clog. If you had a house beside that, it's not going to help your property value with that, being outside. This is Eurasian water milfoil, so it can certainly get just as dense as hydrilla in places. So certainly same problems here. In general, there's a lot of different reasons why we might want to manage aquatic weeds. Some of these might be relevant to southern shores, others may not be, but across the state, we can run into all these different issues. So just a few examples. So on the left is one of our big reservoirs that's hydrilla blocking whoever owns that house from getting out to the main channel. On the right is one of our big power generation units, and their intake canal is getting clogged up with aquatic plants. If they have to shut their power unit down, that's probably about $1 billion worth of economic damage a day if that plant's not producing power. And this is what their intake rate was starting to look like. So obviously that was turned into a big concern for them if, again, their water intake would be fouled up. So on the left, we've got giant Salvinia in a North Carolina pond. So you're going to have zero dissolved oxygen underneath that thick vegetative mat, really no other vegetation, no other species beneath that matted giant Salvinia. On the right is hydrilla in Eno River before treatment and then after treatment. Alligator weed is very common in coastal plain. This is alligator weed clogging up a drainage ditch. So they probably want to consider management there. Obviously, if you have a tropical storm, that ditch is not going to move as much water as it was designed to move with all that plant biomass out there. So there are various reasons why you might want to manage aquatic weeds. So as we move into our weed management decision-making, the use of the body of water is very important. We need to identify all the potential uses and be sure we protect those uses, whether it's irrigation, recreation, fishing, transportation, getting boats out, that sort of thing. Also, weed identification is very important. We have to know our target species. In this case, it's Eurasian water milfoil, but we also have to know if there are any desirable species there that we want to protect. So we want to try to design management programs that will take out our invasive plants, but leave native plants. Another question is, are fish and wildlife being managed in that area? What do we need to do to protect habitat for fish and wildlife populations if those are important to the water body being managed? What is our water quality in the water body, and what do we want that water quality to be? We would like to come out of a management program with improvement to water quality if possible. And then every site's going to have physical and environmental constraints to what can be done, whether it's water flow, slope, things of that nature. And then, of course, there are also economic limitations. What can we afford to spend or invest towards management? Now, approaching management on any site, there is no silver bullet or one-size-fits-all approach to management. So every water body, every town is going to be different. You can't just take a cookie cutter approach and do the same thing in every place. So we need to be really careful that we define the uses and the needs of these systems. And again, natural systems are going to be more complex than impoundments or reservoirs. So the more natural a system is, the more native species we have, the more complex that's going to be. Impoundments and also other human-created things, canals are inherently artificial. They're not going to be as natural, even if we want them to be, as a natural lake or a natural creek or whatever. What are our goals? We want to be clear and set reasonable goals. So certainly eradication is a very big word with a lot of promises attached, and we don't want to overpromise and say a weed's going to be eradicated if there's very little likelihood that that will actually happen. Certainly with Eurasian water milfoil in the eastern part of North Carolina, eradication is probably not a realistic goal on any size or scope. So if we're talking about more complex management programs, then technical advisory committees can be helpful. Conduct due diligence, be sure you're implementing good, solid programs and that everything has been reviewed. And for public systems, you need to have public input, public outreach where appropriate. Now, we do need to link plant biology into our management considerations. Each weed species has its own biological characteristics that drive its growth, reproduction. There will be weaknesses in the life cycle where management can be most effective. And these management techniques need to reduce growth of the plant, but also interfere with reproduction. In this case on the right, we've got hydrilla. So if we just go out there and say October and get rid of all that hydrilla biomass, that's all well and good, but that hasn't interfered with reproduction of hydrilla for the next growing season, and you're going to see exactly the same image in October of the next year. So we need to do our management timing when it interferes with reproduction and also reduces growth. So you can take really good management techniques and they can look really bad if you have poor timing. And sometimes management tools that look really good in the short term may not hold up on a year-to-year basis. So in the case of hydrilla, it produces these turions or tubers that can persist for 7 to 10 years. So that's a huge complication for hydrilla management. Eurasian water milfoil is a little bit easier. It does produce seed, but those seed may not be quite as persistent as hydrilla tubers. So anytime we move from one species to another, we have to be very clear about the biology of that. There are a few other species that don't produce seed or turions, and they're much easier to manage than either hydrilla or Eurasian water milfoil. So understanding species biology is very important for targeting sensitive times during the plant's growth cycle. So now just a quick word about vegetation surveys. Vegetation mapping is really important. It's really good to know what vegetation you have before management so that you can evaluate how effective your management techniques have been. And you can define species abundance distribution both over time and also over space, and doing the same type of mapping and survey at different time points, say year after year, then you have something to compare to and see how things are progressing. So in this case, we've got Sharon Harris Reservoir, and we're mapping hydrilla, but this gives us an estimate of hydrilla density and abundance in different parts of that reservoir. This is Roanoke Rapids Reservoir, so we've mapped the weed communities in Roanoke Rapids. So kind of this mustard color is hydrilla and Eurasian water milfoil mixed. And then there's kind of a darkish green color in there that's Eurasian water milfoil alone. So we can map out different plant communities like this and see what we have at any one point in time, and then see how those communities might change if we're doing management or even if we're not doing management. Now moving into the control options that are available. So these are all the general techniques that are available for aquatic plant management. We'll work through each of these, and I'll be a little bit more specific with regard to Eurasian water milfoil. So this is kind of a complicated slide, but just know that as you move from top to bottom, you're moving from essentially no weeds present to being late in invasion down at the bottom where the habitat, the water body is completely full of weeds. So at the top, you see prevention. Obviously you need to do prevention before you have any weeds in the system. So it's only going to be effective very early on. So again, prevention, it's often too late by the time we think about prevention, but it is possible to limit human activities and maybe stop this boat and trailer from coming in that has hydrilla on it. But once you have Eurasian water milfoil in your system, then it's really too late for prevention to be effective. Now, hand weeding is probably the most common management form worldwide, but it's also the most inefficient, most labor intensive. Keep in mind that aquatic plants can be up to 98% water, so anybody trying to hand weed is going to be pulling out a lot of water weight. Some places like Eno River State Park tried to use volunteers. They got a volunteer group together, asked them to work downstream trying to hand weed hydrilla, and the group made it about 10 feet before they gave up and said it's just too much effort. So hand weeding can really only be done on a very small scale and only in special situations. Now, mechanical techniques are also available. So there are various mechanical techniques. Most of these are going to provide short-term control only. Some of these also can produce a lot of plant fragments, and species like Eurasian water milfoil can spread by fragmentation. Now, in your all's case, you probably have Eurasian water milfoil in most areas anyway, so fragmentation is not going to be a huge deal. But if you did have other species or new species, fragmentation can help spread those along. The other thing, mechanical techniques are typically pretty non-selective. So you're going to pull out plants. You can also pull out turtles, fish. There tend to be a lot of bycatch with a lot of mechanical techniques. Access, offloading, depending on the mechanical techniques. So it's not always viable. Here's a few examples of some mechanical techniques. The guy at the upper left has a chain or bar or something. He's pulling some plants out. We have a small weed harvester that was being used in Puerto Rico. and it would get through several acres in a few month period, and then it would have to go back to the starting point and start again because the plants at its starting point are already grown back up to the surface. At the bottom left is a larger weed harvester. You might see these up in New York, New England, or down in Florida. They don't operate much in the Carolinas. And then a cutter bar at the bottom right that might be effective on some of our floating and rooted plants. It's not going to be very effective on submersed plants like milfoil because it's just going to chop them up and then they'll form roots somewhere else. So here's a couple of big weed harvesters in Florida. They're not really conducting management per se. They're just essentially chopping down big areas and keeping those big areas open to boat traffic. So more or less they're mowing their yard, and then the hydrilla will grow back up and then they'll cut it off again. They're not really trying to decrease the population. They're just trying to maintain it. Now, hydro raking was specifically asked about. I've got a picture of a hydro rake unit over on the right. So these are called hydro rakes, but is it really raking or is it mini dredging? It might really depend on the operation and the specific site. But as you can see, you're pulling up plant material, you're pulling up debris, you're also pulling up some sediment. So on that small local area, you're getting quite a bit of disturbance. Now you can come in and you can do that on very small areas, but it's going to be pretty high disturbance in those small areas. So some advantages of this is that you're removing the plants, you're removing debris, and you're removing some sediment. So because you're removing that top layer of sediment, you're also going to be pulling out the Eurasian water milfoil root cranes. So you are getting those. Disadvantages is going to be whatever bycatch you have in there, turtles, fish, macroinvertebrates, whatever. Those will be getting pulled out as well. Native plants get pulled out. So it's going to be non-selective, again, that area of operation. It's going to fragment plants. So is that important or not important? It's probably not very important for Eurasian water milfoil, but would it be important for anything else? So the most likely outcome is that you're going to get temporary control of small areas with a hydro rake. And that might be what you're looking for, but you really shouldn't expect long-term control and probably not expect to cover a huge area with these. Now, there are other things like benthic barriers. In the bottom middle, you've got a plastic with holes in it that they're pulling across. On the right is kind of a burlap material that they're using in New Zealand. So these materials can prevent weed growth, weeds coming up from the sediment. They won't be very effective once you get sediment on top of them. And if you have gaps like in the right, you can see a seam in between two layers of fabric, and that's all full of weeds right there in the middle. So this can be used fairly effectively on flat bottoms. You can't use them where you have a whole lot of water flow. If you have stumps or logs or anything like that at the bottom, you can't use them very well either because they'll go over top of those. And they're also very non-selective. So if you do cover up something, turtles or whatever else, they will be controlled just like the milfoil would be. And they're also fairly expensive on a per acre basis, but they're also fairly permanent. So you can extract those costs over time. Triploid grass carp are the most widely used aquatic plant management strategy in North Carolina. So these are introduced fish from Asia. They are sterile, at least the ones that you can stock legally are sterile. You do need a permit from Wildlife Resources unless you stock only a small amount. So the good thing about triploid grass carp is that they feed on most submersed plants. The bad thing about triploid grass carp is that they feed on most submersed plants. So triploid grass carp will not be permitted by Wildlife Resources because they would be expected to escape into the sound and potentially feed on native vegetation in the sound and impact the environment over there. So, while they are a great option for controlling hydrilla and inland reservoirs, grass carp would be a very bad option for southern shores. And grass carp also do not like to eat Eurasian water milfoil. So they're going to eat everything else probably before they turn to Eurasian water milfoil. So they wouldn't be very effective anyway. Now that brings us to host-specific biocontrols. So there is a milfoil weevil, and it is specific to milfoils, but not specific milfoil species. So the milfoil weevil is actually a North American native. It fed on northern water milfoil before Eurasian was introduced. It will feed on Eurasian water milfoil. However, it typically doesn't feed at a high enough rate to really control Eurasian water milfoil. So the typical outcome is that you get minor suppression of milfoil populations. Maybe 1 year you get something like control, but then the milfoil will come back. So control is inconsistent, generally unpredictable. It may be good some years, may be bad other years. And typically you need hundreds of individual weevils per square meter to obtain control. So you need a fairly high population of those weevils to actually get control. Drawdowns are available, but probably not an option for your part of the world. And then the last option would be herbicides. So we have about 15 herbicide active ingredients that are registered for use in North Carolina. Most of these are plant-specific modes of action, meaning they attack a plant-specific pathway that's not found in animals or insects. Herbicides can be used on a small scale. They can be used on a large scale. In order for these to be registered with EPA, they must be shown that they do not bioaccumulate. So they will not bioaccumulate in either plants or fish or anything else. And again, they're reviewed both by EPA and NCDA. And there's an extensive use history in some water bodies of aquatic herbicides. Gaston, Waccamaw, Tillery in recent years have used aquatic herbicides. Now 2,4-D is the most specific herbicide that you all are probably interested in. It's a very widely used herbicide. You can find it in a lot of lawn weed control products I just went through earlier. And there's images of 3 turf products on the right that have 2,4-D in them. So 2,4-D was first identified in the 1940s as a herbicide and started being used in some field crops not long after that. It was first available for aquatic use in 1959. And aquatic herbicides in general have to be re-registered by EPA every few years. So 2,4-D has been re-registered by EPA as recently as 2022, also in 2005. So every time EPA re-registers a herbicide, they review the full data package. They may ask for additional data. They may change the registration, which means they may change the label and use patterns, rates, that sort of thing. So each one of those intervals is essentially a new registration, a new review for 2,4-D. So 2,4-D is primarily a broadleaf or a dicot herbicide. It usually doesn't impact too many monocots just because they are tolerant based on their vascular structure. It protects them from the auxin, synthetic auxin hormone effect that 2,4-D has on sensitive plants. 2,4-D is available in both granular and liquid formulations for aquatic use. It provides excellent control of some aquatic weeds, such as milfoils, water hyacinths. There's a few others. 2,4-D breaks down by microbial degradation when it's in water. So that's usually a relatively fast process where you have biologically active water. Because it is microbial, it will be faster breakdown when the water is warmer. So it's all dependent on the microbial action. So the higher the microbial metabolism is, the faster 2,4-D would break down in water. Now, one thing that you have to be cautious about is that there's a lot of different formulations of 2,4-D on the market. I mean, you can see 3 examples there just of the turf products, but there's generic brands. You can find different formulations, different salts of 2,4-D. So you have to be very careful that you select the right formulation of 2,4-D for your use. If you select the wrong one, then you might be more likely to have a negative outcome. So on the right here just shows estimated agricultural use for 2,4-D in 2019 at the top. So it is a corn herbicide, and this makes it really easy to see corn growing regions of the U.S. And down at the bottom is just use of 2,4-D by commodity and by year. So you can see that 2,4-D is a widely used herbicide in a lot of different commodities and crops. These images are from some research we did several years ago on variable leaf milfoil. Again, a different milfoil species. This one is common in the Sandhills region of North Carolina. We weren't using 2,4-D, but we did use Triclopyr, which is a very similar product, has the same mode of action as 2,4-D. So the pictures at the top are before treatment of, it was somewhere in the 2 to 4 acre pond range. One picture is looking in one direction, the other's looking the other direction. And the variable leaf milfoil sends up a little bit more of a flowering segment than Eurasian does. So you can see that greenish fringe coming up above the water. There'd be a whole lot more plant biomass down below that fringe. Top pictures are before treatment and bottom pictures are after treatment with Triclopyr. But again, similar product to 2,4-D, so should provide a fairly similar outcome. Both are synthetic auxin herbicides, so they are essentially hormonal in the plants that cause excessive growth, which results in plant death. Now, herbicide use outcome will depend on many factors, such as herbicide rate, the area that you're treating, water flow, how much dilution you might have, likelihood of reinvasion by plants, species biology, size of the plants at time of treatment, density of plants at time of treatment, et cetera. So the more plant biomass you have, then potentially the higher the herbicide rate or the lower the impact that you might see from the herbicide treatment. So summary, a formal decision-making plan is beneficial, especially in complicated systems. You know, vegetation surveys are very critical for understanding what you have and monitoring the impact of what you might do. So even if you choose to do nothing, monitoring can tell you, you know, is that the right strategy in the long term, or is your Eurasian growing more? Maybe we need to do something in the future. But certainly if you're investing in management techniques, you want to know if those techniques are working. There are multiple management techniques available for Eurasian water milfoil. So the best tool is going to depend on your specific site parameters, you know, how humans want to interact with those systems, biology of Eurasian water milfoil, but a lot of it depends really on what you want to invest and what you want to get out of management. And our management techniques really need to be designed to not only remove the weeds, but interfere with reproduction so you don't get them right back in a very quick manner. We want the management to last as long as possible. So there are, you know, a lot of questions that probably need to be asked. I'm sure I didn't, and there's no way I can answer all of your questions. You know, some of the questions would be, how long could you get control if you're doing a different management strategy? And that might be something that would need to be figured out by repeated survey. But certainly those are things, you know, that can be figured out through monitoring. And if you determine a very deliberate management plan that can all be incorporated in so that you can evaluate things and get feedback so that you can improve whatever management technique you might try to implement over time. So again, I'm sure I haven't answered all of your questions, but I'd be happy to try to answer any other questions that you might have.
Thanks, Dr. Richardson. We'll start out with questions from council members. Anyone up here have a question for Dr. Richardson?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead, Mark.
1 year you can have it and the next year there wouldn't be any. Is that common?
Yeah, it's certainly not uncommon. So, you know, Eurasian water milfoil is going to grow based on its environment. So a lot of different factors will go into that, everything from salinity to water temperature, shading. So if you have a lot of cloudy weather at a certain time of year, that can impact growth of some plants. A lot of rainfall can increase turbidity in some systems, and that might decrease plant growth. Certainly tropical storms are going to cause large amounts of disturbance, so that can interfere with plant growth. And then also there could be other natural things that go on. Maybe the plant caught some kind of disease 1 year and that impacted its growth. Maybe 1 year you had a buildup of milfoil weevils and that impacted growth. So yeah, I would say that certainly you should expect to see increases and decreases in populations and distribution abundance of that plant over time.
Okay, and so the winter doesn't matter whether it's 40 degrees, the water won't kill it. Will it come back? I mean, what you're saying is basically it's unpredictable, right?
Well, for you all, winter is probably irrelevant. I just did a meeting in New York this weekend right beside Lake Erie, and their major problem is Eurasian water milfoil. So if Eurasian water milfoil survives winters in western New York very easily, where sometimes they have 300 inches of snow, your winters are probably not going to have much of an impact at all.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a question.
Yes, Paul.
Dr. Richardson, as you probably know, this is a community that's very sensitive to environmental issues. And we have a number of residents that have expressed concerns to us because this 2,4-D was a component in Agent Orange. And frankly, that's concerning to me. Can you comment on that?
Sure. So Agent Orange was manufactured by a few companies at the request of the U.S. military. So the U.S. military essentially gave those companies a demand with specific specifications, and those companies produced a product for those specifications. So Agent Orange had a few different components. 2,4-D was one component, and 2,4,5-T was another component. Now, in the manufacturing process for 2,4,5-T, if you don't have a high level of refinement, you get dioxin production and retainment in the final product. So dioxin is a very toxic, well, it's actually several different compounds, but dioxin is very toxic, both acute and chronic. So in their manufacturing process, there really weren't controls to remove or limit dioxin. So the impact was that they were spraying relatively high levels of dioxin in areas of Vietnam. Of course, a lot of military members were exposed to that, both in the application, but also in handling. So 2,4,5-T was registered as a herbicide itself in the 70s. EPA did pull registration for 2,4,5-T at some point after that. But with 2,4-D alone, dioxin is not a contaminant in that process, and herbicide companies manufacture 2,4-D to meet EPA specifications. So again, there were issues with both the orders that the military gave to the companies and issues with their production process that included 2,4,5-T.
Thank you.
Dr. Richardson, is there any data on if you use 2,4-D, negative effects on non-target flora or fauna?
Sure, and the highest risk from application of a herbicide like 2,4-D would be to non-target vegetation. So dicot plants typically would be sensitive if you're making an in-water application. So if you have any dicot species that are important in those treated areas, there's only a few monocots that are sensitive. It's not many. So primarily it would be those dicots. And other species of milfoil are going to be really sensitive. So in some places in North Carolina, we have rare species of milfoil. So in those areas, we would not use a product like 2,4-D.
What about reptiles, fish, mammals, humans?
Yeah, there should be so the EPA will not say that a pesticide is safe. It's just a matter of risk. So there would be extremely low risk from 2,4-D to any non-plants. So there's a large margin of safety between rates of 2,4-D that are toxic to plants and rates of 2,4-D that would impact non-plants. And again, these products cannot bioaccumulate based on the data that's given to EPA. So even though they impact plants, something that eats a plant is not going to accumulate 2,4-D, and it won't get passed up the food chain.
Okay. Yes, Rob.
Dr. Richardson, have there been, and this is kind of a takeoff on Elizabeth's question, have there been any longitudinal studies about the effect on humans? I mean, we talk about other plant species and fauna and flora, but specifically on humans, let's say over a 20-plus year period. And, does it have a sufficient number of people in the survey to be statistically significant?
Well, I would say that there have been a lot of studies on 2,4-D and other herbicides with relation to human exposure. That's not the direct area that I work in, but I have seen some of those. So again, every time a herbicide like 2,4-D would go through re-registration, the EPA would evaluate those trials that have been done and would look to see if there's any increased risk from the last registration review that it went through. And 2,4-D, being an older product, has years and years of exposure history. So there are long-term research trials that researchers do with farm workers because they have the highest amount of exposure, and they track their illnesses over time, which products they're working with. So there are several trials that have documented long-term exposure from various pesticides, including 2,4-D, to those farm workers.
Thanks, Dr. Richardson. Any questions from staff?
I have a question.
Oh, Matt, sorry.
Is there a density level that typically triggers you guys recommending a treatment? Infestation density?
Well, I mean, people from time to time will ask me, what I think they should do or what I would do if I were them. And, I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but it doesn't matter to me whether you all manage or don't manage or which management technique you use. What I would care about is that if you're going to use a management technique, that you use it as well as possible, and that you formulate decisions that are based on how you need to use those water bodies. So I can't sit here and tell you that you should manage if you get to a certain point. What I would say is, do you get to a certain point where users of your water bodies are impacted? Do you get to a certain point where Eurasian water milfoil growth is so excessive that it blocks out other plants, other organisms? So these are the things that you would need to either document or think about when you're thinking about management. At what point to you all does Eurasian water milfoil really start to impact what you need to be happening from your water bodies? So it's really based on local needs and local goals for your water body, more so than what I think that you should do or not do.
I just thought of one last question. I'm sorry. If we were to use 2,4-D here in Southern Shores for a management tool, what time of year would be the preferred for making it the most effective use of the herbicide?
Okay, it's another good question. So typically earlier in the season is when you would want to do that. Once milfoil has grown up to the surface, you're probably going to have to use more product, which means more expense and a higher risk factor since you're putting out more product. So when Eurasian water milfoil has emerged for the season from seed, or whether those root crowns start to grow, soon after that is the timing that I would suggest that you hit when the plants are small, but after they have started growing for the season.
Paul?
Yeah, and how is this applied? I mean, is it sprayed, dumped in the water? I mean, what's the process?
So there would be a few different ways to apply 2,4-D, but for Eurasian water milfoil, your options would be to inject a liquid 2,4-D formulation beneath the water surface, or to put out a granular 2,4-D that those products would sink to the bottom and release 2,4-D from the carrier pellets. So either a liquid or a granular put into water. You would not want to do a spray above the water surface.
Oh, Mark.
And just in your experience or whatever is out there that's available after a treatment, how long does it last before there might be a reoccurrence?
So let's say that you get out a good treatment early in the season. How long that lasts is going to be based on how long before Eurasian really gets reintroduced, or you get strong growth back from seed. So I would guess that you would get anywhere from 18 months to 4 years of control from a good 2,4-D treatment. So if you get a timely treatment out, you're not going to have Eurasian back that growing season. And for Eurasia coming back from seed, it would take it probably a couple years to really become vigorous and start growing to the point that it would impact anything. I would think the same for anybody that might bring in a plant fragment after your treatment, after the 2,4-D has degraded. It would probably take that plant fragment a year or two to really establish anything that might be a problem. So a general guess would be, again, 18 months to 4 years, but it's not going to last forever. And at some point you would have to do management again.
Any other questions, council? Good. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Dr. Richardson. We really, really appreciate your presentation and all the valuable information. We may be in contact with you with additional questions later, but we really, really appreciate your time.
Sure. Feel free to send any other questions you have.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to new business, or do you want to do the public comment now? We might want to shake it up. If there's anybody here that wants to speak about what we just talked about with Dr. Richardson, if you want to do your public comment now, we can do that before we do our town manager's recommended budget public hearing. Tommy Carroll, come on up. Tell us where you live and your name.
Tommy Carroll, 77 East Dogwood Trail. I'm going to forward a study to Dr. Richardson that was just done at the University of Wisconsin. And the recent study actually published on the 25th of May. And that was a completion of a study. And the beginning of the study was studying Eurasian milfoil in a laboratory setting where they found detrimental effects on wildlife. Okay. The follow-up study that the Dr. Gavin Denart, I believe is pronounces his name, was in open water, and they found equally detrimental effects of D2,4-D on wildlife. Based on that study, on April 19th of this year, and on the negative influence on fish species, the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation requested the Department of Natural Resources to cease issuing permits of the use of 2,4-D in Wisconsin. So it's a brand new study. I wouldn't expect the doctor to have it, but I'd like to point that study to him. 2,4-D is linked to leukemia in children, birth defects, reproductive problems, soft tissue sarcoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, disrupted liver functions. Exposure to 2,4-D can cause neurotoxicities like development of ALS, loss of smell, liver and damage, and endocrine disruption. Endocrine disruption. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that word correctly. The EPA found that babies born near the use of 2,4-D have higher rates of abnormalities, respiratory and cardiovascular issues, and developmental defects. The reissuing of the EPA permit for 2,4-D is under a federal lawsuit in Washington, D.C. We are genetically modifying crops in this country, specifically corn and soybean, to be resistant to 2,4-D. And they're spraying it right on. There's studies that 66% of the people in urine analysis have 2,4-D in their urine. 100% of the people in Indiana that were pregnant ladies that were tested for 2,4-D had it in their urine, 100%. So I'm going to pass some of that information on to this is, I can send links, I can bombard you with this. This is bad stuff. thank you, guys. I appreciate you looking into this and putting the brakes on it when you did, for at least for us to take a look. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to speak to this specific issue? We'll still have another public comment period later. Okay. So Cliff, I'm thinking we want to end up with a MOU about a survey.
Yes, ma'am.
Now the time to adopt that or
Yes,
to
ma'am.
consider that?
Yeah, if that's something you authorize me to enter, then I can go ahead and do that. I think I told you last time it would be $500 expense. It's actually a $1,000 expense, which,
Okay.
So
council, the manager is asking us to consider authorizing him $1,000 to do basically what amounts to a detailed survey of our water bodies for the occurrence and distribution of milfoil. Any concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to know the extent of the problem before we consider
Yeah.
some risky solution. So, yeah, I'm all for it.
Is this just in the canals, or are you going out into the
this would
creek?
just be in the canals.
Just in the canals, so, right, will you do it in the marina area?
Yes, sir.
Okay, out to what, the first marker?
Yes.
I'm just curious, I mean,
Yes.
how far you're gonna go out?
Yeah, I think that's just us
All right.
asking them. We can do that.
The reason I asked the question, whether it comes back, last year was terrible, this year I haven't seen any yet. I mean, have you? Yeah, I haven't seen any
It's not as bad.
in our
Yeah.
It's not
canals.
as bad as out there in the marina, but
Yeah,
it's not-
yeah, okay,
not
all right,
terrible.
Yep.
okay.
All right.
Do you need-
Council? By consensus, authorize our town manager to enter in the MOU for the survey. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Okay, now, moving on to new business. Town manager's recommended budget. Do you want to speak before we hand it over for the
Just-
public hearing?
Before the public hearing, I just wanted to share that the budget that was presented to the council May 7th is, with the exception exactly what was presented to you is what's before you tonight to be requested to be adopted, with the exception of coming up short. We need we've $22,216 added to the police salary line item. That's just to make sure that we've covered the salaries and benefits. If the chief can fill those two positions between now, July 1, and we're fully funded, then we would need this amount of money to make it to the end of the year. There's likelihood that this will be covered, but I do need to increase starting July 1 with this amount. So what we're asking you all to adopt is general fund appropriations and revenues of $12,795,709, and keeping the tax rate at 0.235 cents.
Okay. All right, so at this time, I'm going to hand us over to our town attorney for a public hearing on the manager's recommended budget.
At this time, I now open the public hearing for the manager's recommended budget for the fiscal year 24-25. And I will, is there anyone signed up to speak? Would anyone like to speak? And I'll close the public hearing.
That's record time. Okay, thank you, sir. Council,
Wait a minute.
Cliff
I need to
wants
just
to
add
speak
one
to us.
more
Yes.
clarification, just to make sure we get this on the record, that increase also allows me to, the budget ordinance only allows the town manager to authorize an increase, a promotion in the amount of 5%. This will allow me to go above that amount for this particular new hire.
Got it.
Got it. Only for that.
Right. All right, so council, we have before us proposed manager's budget, recently slightly modified. Any discussion, questions? As far as I know, we haven't had anyone from the public contact us or staff about the budget. I hope that means that you think we're doing what we need to be doing. If there's no more discussion, we need a motion to approve consideration of a budget ordinance 2024.06.01.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, we have a motion
Second.
and we have a second. Let's see. Make sure I do it the way we need to do it. Any questions? Last chance for questions or comments?
What is the tax rate, Cliff? I know it stays as it is, but
It's broken down really, 0.2358 is 4 cent townwide for the beach nourishment, and then 19.58 for the general fund. And then, of course, there is the MSD tax that stays the same. I believe it's 3 and 4.5%.
7 cent,
I see it in the
seven,
narrative.
1.5 for MSD 1 and 3
Three
for
and
MSD
MSD
2.
Yeah, all those rates stay the same.
Just want to make sure I was reading it right.
Okay. I do know that, I think all the other towns and the county did not raise ad valorem rates with the exception of the town of Duck.
Right.
That raised their rates by 3 cents, if I'm reading correctly. Any other questions or concerns, comments for staff before we vote? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? We now have a motion to an approved budget ordinance. Thank you very much. All right. Next, we have another public hearing. Philip, I'm handing it off to you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I now open the public hearing to consider ZTA 24-03, a zoning text amendment application submitted by the town of Southern Georgia to amend Town Code Section 36-163-1A by amending the parking space width requirement for all uses other than single-family residential homes, adding Section 36-163-4F by adding a reduction of required parking spaces for planting shade trees, amending Section 36-57 by adding the definition of a finished area, adding the definition of finished area ratio, adding the definition of land area, and restating the definition of substantial improvement, adding Section 36-179 to establish commercial design standards, and adding Section 36-299B to C20 to establish that commercial design elements must be shown on a site plan if applicable. And I call Wes Haskett to the podium.
Afternoon, Mr. Hornthal. Thank you. Good evening again, council. This next public hearing, as Mr. Hornthal has pointed out, is ZTA 2403. There's several changes in this ZTA. The planning board has discussed it. This ZTA, they discussed it actually back in November of 2022. And the discussion began with reviewing the commercial design standards that have been adopted by Duck, Kildover Hills, and Nags Head. So that's how the discussion began. They provided feedback to me, to town staff, to draft a ZTA with commercial design standards that have already been adopted in nearby municipalities. So it's something that we could have. So based on the feedback that they provided, I drafted a ZTA for them to consider. They met and discussed it at a meeting this year, April 15th, and then they met again on May 20th. After the April 15th meeting, some revisions were made. And then on May 20th, they made a recommendation to you all to approve ZTA 2403. I can get into all of the different specifics if you like. One thing I will touch on is that it does include a finished area ratio, a maximum finished area ratio of 0.035. I know that's a new concept, and simply put, or as simply as I can put it right now, finished area ratio is a measurement that assesses development intensity by determining the ratio of a structure's total finished area to the size of the parcel. This information was in a handout that the planning board discussed, and I should have included it in your packets. It's a little bit, it explains it a little bit more. So we are proposing to add definitions of, in order to have that finished area ratio maximum of 0.35, we had to create definitions for finished area, land area, and finished area ratio. And I'll just note that finished area is defined as your heated area, your living area. It's not unheated areas. And land area is the net area of a parcel. It wouldn't include water or marsh. And I can try to answer any questions you have on that or any other of the proposed requirements. With respect to a recommendation, we have proposed that the amendments are consistent with the town's currently adopted land use plan, and we recommend approval of the application with one exception, and that is of the requirement of a sketch plan review by the planning board. We initially proposed it to be optional by saying there may be a sketch plan review. The planning board recommended shall. So that is one difference in recommendation. The planning board recommended approval 3-2 of the application at their May 20th meeting. And they also wanted to note, pass on to you all, that this ZTA it's a first pass. And it's something that should be revisited later on and discussed further. Should you all adopt it or parts of it. The board encourages council to consider a larger evaluation of the commercial area, the commercial corridor, as it was referred to, and the town's commercial properties with the possibility of doing a study or long-range study or small area plan for the commercial corridor. And if y'all have any questions, I can try to answer them. And like I said, if there are parts of this that you all would like to discuss further, consider at another time, think about a little bit more, that's understandable. And we would just encourage you to adopt what you are comfortable with so that we have something in place in our commercial requirements whenever we have a new commercial development, submit a new application.
I'll start. Wes, how much of this ZTA is the specific intent was to get it in line with the 160D requirements?
No, ma'am, I should have clarified that, I'm sorry. The only part that is related to 160D is the parking requirement on page 23 of your packets, page 2 of the ZTA. Line number 16, lines 16 and 17, that is the 160D requirement. None of the other, nothing else is required by 160D.
Okay.
My apologies for not clarifying that
I
earlier.
just want to make sure.
The legislature in 160D, they put in there that municipalities cannot have require parking spaces greater than 18 feet width and, a length of 18 feet and a width of 9 feet. And we currently in the commercial district have 9.5 feet. So that was the only 160D revision.
Okay. Second question. The substantial improvement definition.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there not is that a new term? Does that not exist currently in our code?
It is an existing term, and it is the same exact definition that is found in our flood damage prevention ordinance that comes from, I think you can probably remember when we updated our flood ordinance. I think it was in 2020, 2019. It comes from a model ordinance from the state. It also comes from FEMA, the definition of substantial improvement.
Okay.
So on the subject of parking, so my understanding of this change is that you could reduce, for every 20 parking spaces, you could reduce 1 parking space for every shade tree that you planted, up to 5 trees, replacing 5 parking spaces.
Yes, ma'am. And those are shade trees that would have to be planted within the parking area. They couldn't be on the property line and the buffer, a required buffer, because you already have your required buffers along property lines if it's adjoining to an incompatible land use or incompatible zoning district. So the idea is to provide shade in parking areas, so it's not just a parking lot with no landscaping or, anything like that.
Well, I don't know who thought of that, but that's pretty brilliant.
The planning board, and it kind of comes also from, we currently have, or we allow for a reduction in parking spaces for providing bicycle racks in group developments. Southern Shores Crossing has them. I can't recall. I don't know if Marketplace does or not. And I think that's like for every 50 parking spaces for up to 3 parking spaces for 3 bike racks, I think is what it is. So it's very similar to that. But the planning board, in the earlier discussions, I believe they wanted to try to improve appearance of parking areas. So this is an effort to do that.
Where did the cap of 5 parking spaces come from?
Well, I thought about the parking lots that we have in the town. Right now the bicycle rack reduction is only for 3. And I figured, it seems in some of the discussions we've had, I don't know, I can't recall exactly which topic, but it seems like there's always seems to be concern or agreement that we're requiring more parking spaces than we should be.
Really need, yeah.
So why not allow more spaces to be excluded if they provide shade trees?
Would there be discussion on reducing requirement
Sure.
for parking spaces overall?
Oh, yeah, yes, sir. We could discuss that.
The other question, I'm a little bit fresh looking at this because I've gone most of the last month, but there's a lot that I got questions about. Floor area versus finished area, why that distinction? Doesn't make any sense.
So the planning board chairperson Ward and alternate member Zenner, we met and discussed this initially. Mr. Zenner kind of brought up floor area ratio during the special use permit review process last year. And when we started discussing it, we decided, instead of going with floor area ratio, we wanted to call it, they suggested calling it finished area ratio.
Is there a reason? It's a more awkward definition.
Yeah, it's a little different. It's pretty much the same thing.
It's not taught in schools.
I'm sorry?
It's not taught in schools. I mean, floor area ratio is an established concept, whereas finished area is kind of a goofy concept. I mean, you go back to living spaces, so like walk-in coolers are excluded and sprinkler rooms and IT server. I mean, I don't know. It's weird. That's not a question. That's a comment. Fences shall be constructed of wood or matching materials. Is this meant to exclude a specific type of fence or?
Not meant to exclude. It's trying to keep the materials. It's an effort to keep the materials consistent.
Okay. But like a wood fence wouldn't be necessarily consistent with the way a building is built.
I'm sorry, I can't.
I mean, it seems like it's excluding like a metal fence or PVC fence or.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the intent as well.
That's the intent?
Yes, part of the intent. Yes, sir.
Was that in
But also-
discussion or?
But also, yes, sir, it was discussed. Yes, sir, and consistency as well.
And then some of the other metrics like max of 40% of windows for vertical wall area.
10%, 40%. I think duct was, I can't recall. It's either that same number or 50%. I can't recall.
Like a pictorial analysis of what that would look like from a form factor or?
We don't have that at the moment, no, sir.
And then, wow, the articulation thing is along the same lines, although I think that's a positive overall. The encouragements,
Yes.
what's the point of that?
The planning board discussed that as well, and I think this is the result of a compromise.
Yeah.
Some members, I think, didn't want to include some of this, but I think a compromise was reached by saying it was encouraged.
What's the point of encouraging something in the zoning code?
Unfortunately, there are a few areas in our zoning code that already say something is encouraged. So this isn't the first time it's being used.
Yeah, but I mean, if I'm coming to you with an application and you're encouraging me to do this,
encouraging would not be mandatory.
But
If
you
someone,
can't turn-
if one of these items that uses the word encouraged,
Well, the thing
Um,
I'm encouraged about is that it is pointing towards the direction of development that we would like to see rather than saying something we can't see.
Right.
But
right.
I would like to see teeth to encouragement through the means of incentives.
Well, you all can certainly remove that word if you feel
Well, it's
inclined to do so.
Yeah. And then I don't know how far I want to go on this, but I like where it's headed. I just don't think it's a complete document. But we're in question mode, not comment, so.
And I like where it's headed too. I think, making comments about exterior building paint colors shall be subtle, neutral,
I
earth
want that
tones.
defined.
Yeah, well, but it does give you, when you start turning down permits, it gives some backbone to say, look, this is what the town wants.
No, I
That's
agree,
what
but
we want.
I mean, there's no, up to this point, we don't even request the color of
Right.
the building permit.
This may be a subject of
It says
another
shall, and that's-
planning board issue or for the town council. But many of the jurisdictions in the towns up and down the beach are considering putting in some housing for workers. And whether that's the old concept of, residential space above the store, so to speak. And then how would that factor in? And this is once again hypothetical, Wes, to the finished area ratios, and floor areas. So, whether we want to address that now or at a later date or something else to consider, I'm not advocating one way or the other, but it's something that I think that may come forward in the near future.
Right. Well, I think housing options, I mean, that's something that could certainly be tied into all of this. I mean, there's also the possibility of incentives. If we were to adopt a floor area ratio or finished area ratio or whatever you want to call it, I mean, there are different things that we could look into with how to do it. I mean, that's a very good point.
Thank you.
I think the concept, well, the floor area ratio is a good concept. I mean, it controls massing on the site, but where did 0.35 come from?
So if in the staff report, you'll see that I've given examples of
Yeah.
the
I see the table.
try to go from smallest to largest.
Mhm.
So right now, currently, our largest development, 0.20, is the marketplace. And that's the current level. And obviously, we wouldn't want to limit them from adding housing or additional commercial development. So this would allow for the marketplace, if they wanted to expand it, they could. But also, if we received an application for another site, it wouldn't be treating them unfairly. It's not just with respect to the marketplace, but I think the intent was to not limit them so they can't expand with what they have there today. This gives them some room to grow.
I know you can't, after I read this a couple times, I'm not a planner at all. It was ambiguous. I don't know how you do your job or look at an application fairly because there's so much ambiguity in some of the phrases here that I don't know how and you'd be open to interpretation, which
Subtle.
would make it even more difficult for you. And I'm with some of the comments that have been made here tonight. That this needs further review. I mean, I in good conscience, I couldn't pass this. I'll be honest with you.
I'd like to get, like, out of curiosity with the floor area, finished area issues that I brought up, like in your table, for instance, Town Bank's got a smaller building area than a finished area. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, is that a typo or is it?
No, sir, it's because it's two stories. There's 2 stories of living space. And it's just one footprint, the building footprint.
Oh, okay.
The building area-
I was misrepresenting building areas.
The building
floor
area
so,
is the
yeah.
footprint of the building. So if you have your
Straight down to the
footprint
floor.
and then you have 2 stories of living space, you're going to have more living space than building area.
I think-
And
Go ahead.
to your point or to your question, I guess if you all aren't inclined to move forward with it and if you have concerns with ambiguity or being challenged, I'd be interested to see a Duck, Kildare Hills, or Nags Head if they've ever been challenged on ambiguity with what they have, because a lot of this comes directly from them.
Well, I think you made a comment, this is kind of a document that we ought to take a look at, and we'll probably be looking at it again and again. I don't want to look at it every meeting. I'll be honest with you.
No,
I mean,
no.
and it's important. I'm not dismissing the importance of this at all, but I think we need to have a little clearer picture here myself.
Well, I think this is an excellent start. And I think if we look around us at some of the architecture that the community really objects to, I think this is a good start in making sure that that does not take a foothold here in Southern Shores.
I think I could build some pretty ugly stuff under Western Sewer County, so.
But you would not do that.
No, but it's not, I don't think it's necessarily meeting the goal, but there's some, I mean, Mark's, it's not ambiguous. I think Wes is just, like exterior building paint colors shall be subtle, neutral, and earth tone. I mean, that's at least.
I would be okay without the word subtle, honestly. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
neutral and earth tone would be okay.
And then you look at what our existing stock is, and then some of this doesn't kick in. Like all of our existing commercial owners can repaint their property no matter what
Yes.
right now and not have to comply with any of this. So
Correct.
And like Mark said, I don't want to look at it every month, but there's a lot in here that I don't necessarily want to codify. So I'm commenting when we should be questioning. What?
I mean, I think I gathered, paint colors can come out. Would you, if you all have guidance to offer for us to consider going forward, do you all agree that we don't want to address paint colors?
I think we should workshop what we do want to address and stop really thinking along what we don't want and really try to paint a picture of what we do want and see what our commercial district as it redevelops and lay out sort of a 30-year viewpoint that would probably meet stakeholders within the town, planning board, members of council. I mean, it's a heavy lift, but that was my vision when I was thinking about commercial design standards and was kind of pushing it over the last year or so, rather than a number of bullet points. I mean, I think it's that when I first read through this, catching up to speed, floor area ratio caught my, I'm always worried about unintended consequences, so floor area ratio caught my attention, but the more I read it, it's really the other section that I don't like more than the floor area ratio. I think floor area ratio is heading the right direction and controlling the mass developable a lot. And whether or not 3.5 is the right number, I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's a bad number to start with, but it's some of the other, I don't want to say anything is encouraged. I'd like to say, if you do this, you'll get this, and things of that nature, and make it more key. And then the other question about sketch plan review being shall or may, you put it in as may, they've asked it to be shall. You recommend it as may?
We recommend it as may.
So I think a sketch plan review should be, at this point, at the purview of the applicant, but I think it should be with staff, like a traditional tech review program, rather than necessarily something that's to go back and forth. I mean, but we need to give them guidelines for that tech review to apply to. I think you've made a really admirable start with it.
I did listen to some of the planning board discussion about specific to the sketch plan review, and they were pretty, I think, strongly in favor of this is a good step to add to the process. Because it's the opportunity for the applicant to interact with
So then something can be
representatives of the town.
encouraged. I mean, the way there's a lot of investment to develop building elevations, and so, I mean, it's to just, and then not have the guidelines be as categorical as they could be. I don't know. I would be more in favor for it to be mandated if our guidelines are clear in some ways. And to say architectural embellishments with a coastal design are encouraged. I mean, think about you're putting yourself in the shoes of the applicant, like, okay, so I'll put a little gable cross up in the gable and maybe the planning board will be okay with my sketch. It's just weird. I mean, it's not.
Well, but it is a start, and if there are unintended consequences, I think we could deal with those down the line. We're not trying to be punitive and stop development, but we're trying to go where, we've wanted to go, was to have some control over what's built in the commercial area.
Well, at this point, any other questions for,
Yeah,
for Wes?
I've got one specific one. The number 11, excuse me, building elements that resemble animals, lighthouses, castles, or pirate ships are prohibited. What is a building element? I mean, I like that, but what is a building element versus like a giant pizza stuck on the side of a building? Is that a building element, or is that a decoration, or is that a sign, or?
I would say that a slice of pizza on a wall or whatever your example is, that would be considered a sign if it's something that's drawing attention to it. It's something that's attached to the structure. It's not a part of the structure. It's not an element. It's not a part of it. That would be my assessment of your example.
Okay. So these building elements, and I think you and Wes told me a little bit about, this would be somebody building a pirate ship entrance to a place.
Correct. So this was actually, came from a suggestion from Ms. Donna Creef.
From where?
Ms. Donna Creef, who was the Dare County Planning Director. She said at one point they received an application for a commercial building in Hatteras, I think, that had the front of the entrance was like the mouth of a shark. So that's kind of where this came from.
Any other questions for Wes?
No.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you all for the feedback. It's plenty to think about. Thank you.
Is anyone signed up to speak? Madam Mayor, it's the pleasure of council.
So, thank you, Philip. Public hearing's done. I said too much in there. I forgot it was Philip's public hearing, my bad. Okay, so I'm hearing lots of different things. I'm hearing it's a good first step. I'm hearing we don't want to see this every meeting. I'm hearing we might clean this up a little bit and make it a little bit better, perhaps get rid of words like encouraged and put something in there like you do this and we'll give you something, a parking space or two. So council, do we have any more discussion? Or a motion?
Well, as far as discussion goes, I think that nobody just made all of this up. I mean, they looked at, the planning board and the staff looked at what other towns have incorporated. And it is a start. And right now, we don't really have any commercial design standards. So yeah, it's probably not perfect. I think I agree with Matt that having shall instead of may might be a good addition on those site plans.
Well, it's in there now as shall,
Shall.
So that would
right?
be it.
Okay. But the two instances of the word encouraged, which as Wes points out, it's not the only place in our ordinance that word exists. So we are.
That doesn't make it okay.
That doesn't make it okay. Anyone else? Comments, thoughts?
So I think that I'm with, it's a great start. We need something like this. I personally think it's a little incomplete, that we need to go back and flesh out some more. I don't know whether we need a committee or something, but just to have it so we have a commercial standard, I don't think that's right now. If we got an application tomorrow, we would have to live with this.
There are
If
elements,
we passed it, we would have to, if we got an application tomorrow.
yeah, and I don't want to go back and carve up some of this
Yeah.
stuff. I'd rather either pass something that eliminates some of the miscellaneous state. I mean, I think the most important thing in here is the floor area ratio. Although I don't like calling it finished area ratio personally. So that's where my whole kick is. I'd rather redefine it, define floor area ratio clearly, and I think that's too much of a change from the ZTA that's in front of us.
Okay.
And then all the section in generally, I mean, I think that whole thing needs to be revisited.
Yeah.
Which section?
The whole section of 36179B, which is in part 3.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest gain immediately to sort of set the standard for commercial development is that floor area ratio, which I keep miscalling it because it's finished area ratio.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I don't know if that's too much of a change, but then we'd have to define floor area ratio. So that's where I'm like, hey, there's a lot that needs to be amended, and I don't like doing something new that needs to go back and be amended again.
Right.
So
Okay.
what would that process of amendment look like?
So we would go back to the planning board, I believe. Would we not?
Yeah.
I'm seeing nods in agreement with that. But we probably would get a better product if we give an idea to staff of what
I
we
like
have
the
in
idea.
mind.
Yes, I agree, and I think it's more, I like the idea of putting a working group or heaven forbid a consultant or something of that nature to look at our commercial district, maybe take some of the elements of this that we think we know we want right away and go ahead and kind of fast track that, but then really look at designing. I mean, things like, do we give credit on parking spaces? I mean, I think the tree credit's a fantastic thing, but maybe our parking space requirements are overwrought to begin with. I mean, it's the trend right now across the United States to cut back on some of these parking requirements.
With having these asphalt deserts.
Yep. And really just, I mean, I think that the point that I was trying to get at, maybe it's a dream, is the sort of blue sky the thing and really dream about what this commercial district could be and then try to figure it out rather than saying, well, this person might try to do this, so we need to stop them. I mean, I just think it's the wrong approach.
Okay.
And a lot of this, I feel like, is addressing the latter.
Okay. So I'm not hearing support for a motion either way on this particular item.
Well,
So,
not being a builder and not being perhaps as familiar with some of these things as Matt is, I think it's a good start. I mean, I just wonder how long it's going to take us to punt this back to the planning board or set up consultants.
I agree.
It's just going to take a long time.
So maybe figure out a way to take some elements of it is that's what I would prefer.
so
And
can
if we do
we,
that tonight, that's probably going to take. I
No.
don't know.
I don't think it's a good time to do it tonight. Can we,
I was willing to take a shot.
can we table it and say we're going to address it in July?
And give,
And give ideas.
in our
to-
ideas,
Yes.
to give
And-
strict instruction to the planning board.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
And That's reasonable. That's reasonable. Have something then to start with.
Yeah. Cliff, can you help us
Can we
with how we word that to make it sure that we're not doing something we ought not to be doing?
I'll make a motion to table this for further discussion in our July meeting.
Is that it?
Second.
You have a motion and a second?
Okay.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
That's a good.
That's what we got. Okay. Thank you, council. And thank you, planning board. It's not an easy task that we have.
It's hard
asked
to
you-
pick it like an apple out of a barrel. I mean, it's easy for me to criticize the work once it's got up here, but
Yeah.
I appreciate the efforts.
Absolutely. Next, Philip, another public hearing.
I now open a public hearing for LDA-24-01, a landmark designation application submitted by the town of Southern Shores to designate 13 Skyline Road as a historic landmark. And call Wes Haskett back to the podium.
Thank you again, Mr. Hornthal. Council, as you all directed, town staff prepared a landmark designation application and a report for the structure, which is a flat top located at 13 Skyline Road. The Historic Landmarks Commission considered the application at their May 28th meeting, and they unanimously recommended approval of the designation. There's an in your packets, I included the application, the report, an ordinance. The ordinance is actually the document that is what is used to, it's recorded at the Register of Deeds as if it's approved. It runs with the land. Can be removed. Designation can be removed if requested by the owner. And you also, in your packets, there was a copy of the architectural description prepared by Chris Nason, as well as the letter submitted from the State Historic Preservation Office addressing the report. And just to make sure that you all understand that we are requesting, or the designation request is to designate the structure at 13 Skyline Road, not the lot and the structure. In that instance, say, for example, if we designated the lot and the house, if we ever wanted to put a shed on the lot or something, it would just require an approval process where we'd have to, the Landmarks Commission would have to issue a certificate of appropriateness. But obviously, this is this house was built in 1953. It is an excellent example of the Frank Stick design flat top. I think everyone in this room is very familiar with that name. You know, the pride, I think, that the town of Southern Shores takes in having flat tops in the town. I think it goes without saying that since the town acquired this property in 2023, before the town acquired it, the Community Foundation, it was gifted to them in 2007. It was used as an office. And prior to that, it was used as a single-family dwelling. Since it's been acquired by the town, we have made some modernizations so that it could be used as a single-family dwelling again. So we recommend that you all adopt the ordinance that designates the structure at 13 Skyline Road as a historic landmark.
Is anyone here signed to speak on this issue? I now close the public hearing.
Thank you, sir. Council, any discussion? Questions?
My only comment is I noticed in the application that the house doesn't have a name. And yet the Historic Foundation, the state one, gave it a name, the name of the first owner. And I just to throw in, it would seem like maybe we need to decide on a name. Not tonight, but at some point.
Okay.
I mean, I think
A lot
everybody,
of them have followed the first owner, like when you see, sometimes they'll put a slash with the current owner.
but I think everybody calls it the Frank Stick House. So, and he didn't live there, but he designed it. So just something to think about.
Okay. Anything else, council?
It's a good thought.
All right. Requested action, motion to approve the ordinance designating the structure at 13 Skyline Road as a historic landmark.
So moved.
Second,
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
It's without a name, right?
Without a name currently.
Okay.
Hopkins got it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, staff, for that. Okay. Next is Cliff, our 2024 street improvement project.
Thank you. So back in the fall of 21, the SEPI Engineering presented the town council a pavement condition plan and a 10-year capital improvement plan to address bringing all of our streets from what they're primarily in fair condition up to good condition. The purpose of the plan was to preserve payments, delay future deterioration, and improve overall conditions cost effectively and efficiently. And so the rank order, it goes, failed streets have a PCI of payment condition index of less than 20, poor is 44 to 20, and fair is 69 to 45. And the majority of our streets fall in that 69 to 45 range. The first year, as y'all know, we put out a big project, but it was primarily patching. And the purpose of the patching was to build a base before we came back and overlaid. What we've learned from this is we get a lot more bang for our buck if we just go straight to the milling 2 inches of pavement and then overlaying. And so this would be our third year of working this plan. And then the next year, 24, 25, when I say this year, I mean between now and end of June this year, And we would have planned, it started in 2021, we would have all the streets that are listed as needing mill and fill, with the exception of a few that have stormwater components that need to be addressed before the pavement's addressed. We'll have all that addressed in the first 4 years. I put in the packet, you'll see kind of the average of the first 2 years, and then this being the proposed year, what the average PCI is. And so we're trying to continue to address the lower scored streets. We have, as part of that study, every street is listed, every segment of street is listed, and they're ranked ordered. And so we've started at the bottom and trying to work our way up, addressing the poorer streets first. The other thing that we've learned in this process is the cost of mobilization is pretty significant. So rather than putting together a package exactly the way the plan laid it out, we've considered the need to put the streets in close proximity. So we feel like we get more bang for our buck. Last year, I think we did 2.7 miles. What we're proposed to do now is about 3.8 miles. The town's budgeted in those years $1 million each year. And so what we're asking you all to do with this, because it's actually over the budgeted amount that we have currently, we're asking to be able to split this year and next year into 2 years. So we'll spend $2 million effectively in both years. But we can get a really good project if we do what's presented before you tonight, which is $1,970,975. We'll take that, reduce it from next year's plan, and be somewhere in the $800,000, $700,000 range for the project we bring to you next year. So what we're asking for is there's a budget amendment that coincides with this.
Page 73.
73. And I have closed that. You got it.
Number 30.
So again, the budget amendment would be for $264,789 to make up the difference. And then next year, we'd reduce the budget or the project by that amount. So again, the ask is to authorize the town manager to enter into a contract with the low bid. We did get 3 bids, which is something is new. We've historically only gotten 2. So we're thankful to get 3. And you can see these bids they're right in line. For almost $1.2 million project, the low bid and the second low bid were $3,000 off. So we feel like we got a good bid. Either that or they're talking. So that's the ask.
Okay. Council, questions for Cliff?
What was the amount of the budget amendment? Because on page 30,
Page 73.
on page 70, I'm sorry, it had a different number.
Yeah, there's 2 different numbers, 789 and 589.
The budgeted amount, the correct amount is $264,789.
Okay, that's just a typo there on that page 70. Okay. Any other questions for Cliff? Okay. Discussion, council? If not,
I'll make a motion
We
to
need a motion.
authorize the town manager to enter in a contract with the lowest bidder for street work and additionally approve the budget amendment number 30 for $264,789.
we have a motion, we have a second. All right, very good, thank you. Any other comments, discussion, questions? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, council.
The
We
window for
should
this
get a lot of
project.
streets improved this year.
Yes, ma'am. The project has to be completed by October 25th.
Okay. All right. Number 10, we have a very ambitious agenda, which we're almost at the end of, folks. Planning board reappointments, page 74. Wes, I believe this is you.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening again. We have the current planning board, Matthew Ward and Robert McClendon, And alternate members, Michael Zenner and Charles Reese, their terms are set to expire on June 30th. All of those members, all four of them have indicated that they would be willing and that they are interested in serving another term. Mr. Reese and Mr. Zenner, they were appointed kind of towards the end of a term in the seat, so they have not served a full three-year term yet, but they both expressed interest in serving a 3-year or working with the board for a full 3-year term. And also there are 3 applications on file from residents who are also interested in serving the board. But our current members are interested in being reappointed.
And John Fennell goes away because,
That is a county appointment.
Right.
He actually, we still are entitled to have an ETJ representative because we still have the ocean and water ETJ areas. ETJ, we got the Marshall any longer, but we still have the ocean and the sound ETJ areas.
okay.
So those
Understand.
unincorporated areas are subject to be, the county can appoint someone to represent those areas. And Mr. Finelli did tell, I haven't talked to him in a while, but he did tell me one of the last times we spoke that he would talk to the county about having them appoint him to represent those areas.
Okay.
So that will be a county appointment.
That's county. Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Any questions for Wes? Thank you, Wes,
Thank you.
very much.
I'm glad there's 3 people that want to be on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, that's
that's
encouraging.
a terrific sign, huh?
It's
Yeah,
encouraging.
I think that's a terrific sign. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. I guess I probably should have asked this when Wes was up here, but our members Ward and McClendon, this would not be the end of their first terms, but this would be the end of which numbers of terms for both of those members? Sorry.
I don't have that information. I know Mr. Ward, I think he served at least 2 terms. He's been on the board for at least 2 terms. Mr. McClendon, probably about around the same. But again, I'm not 100% sure, but they've both served.
I think he was an alternate.
I'm sorry?
He was an alternate before this term, I think. 'cause
Yeah,
McClendon was an
remember
alternate. I mean,
reviewing-
typically that's how
Yeah.
the regular members, they
Right.
serve as alternate members prior to
This would
being
be his
appointed.
third
as-
term, but I think the first term was alternate.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, 3 terms. So chairperson Ward, 3 terms. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Sorry again. Council, we need a motion to appoint or reappoint the 2 regular planning board members and 2 alternate planning board members to 3-year terms.
We'll make a motion.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any other discussion?
Just that we have a very experienced, hardworking planning board, and we have, very good applicants who also want, so it is hard, but these folks have done a great job.
Yeah, I don't want to discourage anyone from participating. We really want to, reach out and have more participation from the community at the planning board level. So don't be discouraged, because, anyway. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're to general public comment, the second round. Anyone? I think Tommy has already spoken. Anyone else want to speak to the council? Seeing none, we'll move on to council business. Mark, you want to kick us off with council
Okay,
business?
tour board, at the last meeting, last month, they approved the 3-year strategic goals for ways to increase tourism on the Outer Banks, all the way from Hatteras to Duck. And the board is working well. January, February, occupancy was not the greatest. March was flat. It did tick up this April, and it is over budget. And that's nice. There's some some hesitation, not hesitation, but concern about what this year is going to be. We're looking at it kind of like a settling year, since we had 3-4 years after COVID and things were up and down and sideways. But I can tell you it's uneven across the county. Hatteras is their representative on the tour board, says bookings don't look good. You come to the northern beaches, you get north of the junction out here, and the bookings look great. So there's a little bit of just a little bit of uncertainty what's going to happen based on where you are on the beach. Same way with meals collections. Meals collections went up as well, and which was really encouraging. In April, they were flat in March. Year to date, if you take the first 4 months of the month, we are down under last year. We are, but there's a lot of optimism on the part of everybody on the board that things will pick up as the summer goes on. We're right into June right now. So it is. The interesting thing is that during the colder months, January, February, March, and April, visitations to a lot of the historic sites and the sites of interest from the visitor centers and everything else was up over the previous year. And yet we didn't have the occupancy. We're trying to figure out if that was day trips or what. But I mean, to Elizabethan Gardens, to the Graveyard of the Atlantic, which just remodeled and reopened last month, which was terrific. So we're trying to figure that out, and we'll try to do the best we can. And Leo, I'm trying to do the job you did for so many years, okay? So, but I'm learning as we go here, but that's the way it goes. But there is some optimism, and we're getting ready to approve our budget too for next year, and we're counting on receipts to be pretty good. So it was budgeted conservatively though. Okay.
Thanks, Mark.
All right.
Rob?
There was no meeting for Current TV this past month, so nothing much to report there. Cliff and I did go over to Kitty Oak Elementary School, and we gave a presentation to about 80 plus third graders about what's the role of local government. And we tried to get ask them some questions to get it down to their level. And I think it worked out pretty well. Cliff and I met ahead of time, and we asked questions, somewhat like, do you ride your bike on a sidewalk? Do your parents drive on roads in Southern Shores? Do you see police cars in town? Do you see fire department? Would you like a gas station right next to your house? So we tried to make it very applicable to them. Do you pay for any of this stuff with your local allowance? No. Kind of like, does it come out of your parents' allowance in terms of taxes? Yes. So in other words, we did that, and then Cliff was great. He went through, how all of we did a little exercise of the distribution of what is actually spent in Southern Shores, and then what their priorities were. And I won't get into that, but it was interesting. And I think we should do it again next year.
Yeah,
Matt?
nothing to report.
Oh.
Well, while Rob was dealing with little kids, I volunteered to take on the cemetery program.
Circle of life.
Circle of life here. Yes, there is a substantial amount of money in our budget that can only be spent on the cemetery. And so I think we have agreed that we want to move in that direction. The cemetery is located on a very pretty street. It could be a very picturesque part of town, and we've got a little bit of money to devote to that. So if there's anybody here tonight or anybody that's listening to this that wants to participate in this, if they'd let me know, that would be great. I've already talked to a few people who own cemetery plots who are agreeing to be on a, we thought we'd start off with a smaller committee and get some ideas and then open it up for a broader discussion in the community.
Thanks, Paul. Let's see. Our next meeting is July the 2nd, regular time, 5:30. In addition to beautifying the cemetery, we've beautified the entrance to town right by the Kitty Hawk Elementary School ball fields with a brand new sparkling shine. Welcome to the town of Seven Shores. So please pay attention to our new sign. It's beautiful. And on Wednesday, July 17th, we'll have another mayor's chat from 4:30 to 5:30. And I'll announce it again in July at that meeting, but I thought I would mention it tonight. And we'll definitely advance notice when we get the streets project underway. So everybody is made aware of seeing the guys out and about. And we're still hoping to go to bid in October with our Juniper Culvert Replacement Project. And hopefully starting that after the first of the year. Wow, I feel like we've done a lot of work tonight, folks. Or at least talked a lot. Thank you all for coming. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Thanks, guys, gals, folks. Let's say the 18th, 2 weeks from today. How about that?